you'll find there's quite a lot of similarities between the structures that Joseph talked about first and New Zealand Trade and Enterprise. We are both government entities. We are both typically providing co-funding facilities to companies that have to be justified, both in commercial terms and fiscal terms. New Zealand is the Economic Development Agency, and those are the main basis of our aiding companies. So essentially it's building capability, but all towards the point of getting companies into export markets to increase revenue for the economy. Where does NZTE fit in? We really get involved with the startup and fairly early stage companies, but it tends to be a very light touch contact, typically over phone and using what was the biz organisation. The main programs, the Growth Services Fund and the Enterprise Development Grant umbrella, there's two sides to it. The capability building, early stage, relatively small amount of money, and the main market development grant. We do other institutionalized grant funding. An example is we support incubators, including this one. Growth Services Fund, it was a major funding exercise. It was more about, and it's evolved, it's changed a bit in all honesty, but it's really more focused on building business capability. So it's getting your house in order before you seriously start going offshore. It's a reasonably significant program with fairly tight eligibility criteria. I'm not going to go through that in detail, but again, it focuses, if you like, on the high growth potential. And another important element is the financially viable. This is co-funding, so if you're going for, this could be 100,000 or above in terms of the application. Business as usual activities in all our funds really are not on. And that's an important thing, and it's in applications, companies have to think a wee bit about their wording, because the written word is open to interpretation, and in many cases it's people who may not be familiar with your business or your industry vertical who are reading these things. So please be clear and concise, and make sure that it comes across it's not business as usual. You're not allowed to buy capital items either. And no double dipping, but that's fairly reasonable expectation, I think. Just be aware that as I say, the fund is changing, and the focus used to be, to get lots of funding out to needy companies. It's become harder and much more selective. So companies applying for a GSF is quite a tortuous process, and it's quite a tortuous process for people like me, in the sense that I get an application, and even before I get an application, I will ask for a sort of summary application, and I will put an assessment to it, and I'll send it up to my management and say, is this the type of thing that we want to give this type of grant for? And they may say no. And I have to come back to you and say, no, it's not going to work, you're too small, we don't think you're ready for it, whatever. Or we don't think you can afford it. Financially, we don't see how you can co-fund that sort of level of investment, perhaps. Then when you do get the application, I have to do an evaluation assessment of that, and then they basically assess my assessment. So it's a fairly tortuous process. The money is quite reasonable, and the focus is fewer and smaller and bigger, which just makes it harder to all intents and purposes. And so just be aware of it. I love this addition of transformational change. I've yet to have somebody who can actually tell me exactly what it means, but apparently it's now a new criteria of acceptance. As you see, it is a fairly tortuous process. It's signed off at the chief executive level, up to and including 75,000. Beyond that, it's a panel. And I'll speed up. The capability building grant for the enterprise development grant funding is basically a net entry level one. It's basically for education, basic market research. It's a positioning grant, only up to 20,000, and it can be addressed by small organizations, so it's relatively easy to get. That's the sort of activities. Remember, there are copies here, so don't worry about it if you're missing it. And they discontinued some of the functions, including IP. Anyway, 20,000 doesn't buy you any IP protection at all, I'm afraid, in reality, so it was irrelevant. Market Development Fund is the major one of the Enterprise Development Grant umbrella. It's basically up to $100,000 for each of 5 years. And it's all about assisting going into market type activity. It's not capability building, it's getting you offshore, overseas. Those are the sort of things it does. And it's about doing. So they don't like companies who come and say, we're doing this market research and we're planning a strategy to go offshore. Their view is, well, Market Development Fund is about doing, not about planning. And the planning perhaps is done in the GSF side of things. But interpretation can be quite a difficult matter in the applications, unfortunately. The Market Development Fund is very much a process driven by the bureaucratic centre of NZTE. I, as a client manager, typically wouldn't be involved at all. It's a direct contact and registration through a website. They'll send you an application. You complete the application. They'll basically give it a tick in the box approach to make sure it complies with the rules. If it doesn't, they'll ask for more information. If it does, it's then put towards an assessment panel in terms of the quality of the application. And as I say, typically, that will be invisible to me. I mean, I can chase things up, but it's a discrete process. Just round off with the fact there are a bunch of websites that are worth looking at and considering, just in terms of linkages. I think that's about it.